Koans are stories that break the mind's habit of hyperlogical dichotomizing. Tantra does the same thing, but with situations. The 8th century Mahasiddha Saraha, in a time of great concern for religious purity and lineage, deliberately defiled himself by living in a graveyard, taking an Arrowsmith woman from the marketplace as guru and consort. He used the discomfort of impurity to loosen the hold of self. Jesus does the same thing. Having said, give up self, take up your cross and follow, and do not judge lest you be judged, he used taboos to reduce ego. He restored those who are ritually impure by being with them. Without abdicating his agency to evil or ego, without abdicating his silence to noise, he hung on a cross between criminals, descended to the dead to empty both hell and the phenomena of physical pain itself of their terror. We could say that Jesus heals and calls a certain set of his devotees by what he does not do. Recall the royal official who was merely told, "Go, your son will live." And the demoniac in Mark, who wanted to get into the boat with the apostles, but was told to return with gratitude to his family and friends. That theory holds a certain amount of water, but lately to me, it seems like building a narrative out of a sense of painful marginalization. So for now, I need to stay away from it. Instead, I just have some questions. We're dealing with the blind man healed. What kind of resentment might it create for us if Jesus corrected our thinking? The disciples, hooked on causality and blame, asked, "Who sinned, this man or his parents?" And Jesus says, "He was born blind so God's works might be revealed." What would it be like to be healed by someone we can't see through a process of being defiled and sent into the unknown? Recall that the blind man who had mud made of Jesus' spittle spread on his eyes was sent while still blind to Siloam. What kind of feelings would it create if the end result of the truth were exile? Later, the man born blind defended Jesus, whom he'd never physically seen, and he was driven out of the temple. I'd be willing to bet that not all the feelings that those questions create are positive. If being healed creates negative emotions in us, rejecting or repressing them won't do us any long-term favors. Noting them is just good self-awareness for all of us. But the point is to get acclimated to neutral or positive sensation and emotion with ever increasing speed. Blind people who regain their sight are often overwhelmed while they get acclimated to increased visual stimulation. People whose ego drops off too soon must often go through a lengthy process of discovering and exercising each individual muscle of virtue that egotism left atrophied. Slowly, the ability to deliberately meta-think emerges from the barrage of compulsive thought. Slowly, the higher self's capacity for self-care develops. Slowly, prayer becomes quiet and visceral as practitioners shed their judgments, descending from the mind into the heart to live compassionately. Intuition echoes the prophet Isaiah by saying, "You shall hear a voice behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.'" The trouble is, consenting to such an obscured view of things is the mode Isaiah gives for fulfilling his earlier statement. "Your eyes," he said, "shall see your teacher." So your man, the blind beggar, needed clarification because confusion was his only fulfillment. "Who is he, sir?" He's speaking of the Messiah. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus responds, "The one speaking with you is he." What follows is theology by Josh. Discard it as you need to. But I think this is Jesus' way of giving the blind man back his vital connection to the world. The NRSV's translation choice is interesting. They don't have Jesus use an I am statement, whether or not there might have been one in the original text. I don't know. He says, the one speaking to you is he, whether a stranger or the blind man's own higher self, had it been bird song or the silence of the morning that spoke to the blind man, that, says the teacher, would be his voice. I interpret it this way because I'm fairly certain it's not the only place Jesus' teaching leaned in this direction. In the Synoptics, Jesus says, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, you do to me. Later, after his crucifixion and death, Jesus would appear as a stranger. And the disciples would have to practice not comparing their historical memory of Christ with what was in front of them, not harboring expectations that Christ's teaching be exclusively pleasant. They'd have to jettison their paradigms or else fail to see the risen Christ in things like strangers, their own suffering, a sheep gate, broken bread, and their own bodies. While we were yet sinners, Jesus died for us. Those who are endowing their awareness with depth will readily admit they are still sinners, letting God figure out whether it's actually true or just a way to avoid spiritualized narcissism. If we can get acclimated to intuitive ways of knowing, we have a tremendous, albeit ugly and messy, opportunity for healing. If we can accept that what's speaking to us is Christ, we have a tremendous route to seeing what's right in front of us as God incarnate. There are stories about hippies in the 70s transubstantiating pizza and beer. It was so silly. It's also unnecessary. Christian Tantra practitioners who say to themselves, what is Christ, know that there is no such thing as selves who go to pizza parlors for a slice and a bottle of suds. There is Christ who comes to himself, taking nourishment from both himself and what of himself he sees in others. Don't let the ego double down, saying we don't need the sacraments either. The mind is sluggish, see, and we forget that being transformed by the renewing of our mind takes as its foundation the routine sacramental miracle happening daily in reality. Our job is to exempt ourselves from nothing while being mindful that God is literally present in everything. Let go of the mind asking who, where, and how. Here and now, the one speaking to you is he. All has always been one, and we'd know it all together if only every part of us would sit quiet and listen.